Good. So welcome everybody. This is our talk on energy transition part 2. And I'm very happy to welcome all of you tonight together with the other co-host of this event. We have Hannes Kucha, the Secretary of EAGE Local Chapter Netherlands, that also organized this event. So he will take over in a few slides this introduction. And then during the Q&A session, the moderation of the Q&A session, we will have Karin de Borst, who is leading the special interest community in decarbonization and energy transition of EAGE. And then, of course, welcome by myself. During this introductory presentation, we will, as usual, mention all the people that are part of our community, in particular the EAGE local chapters. We will talk about today's topic and agenda and the house rule of this WebEx event. As usual, I want to welcome all our from the different local chapter, London, Paris, Oslo, Aberdeen, that are participating with us this afternoon. Also, I want to welcome the students from Delft University, but also from Aachen University, and the member of the EAGE Decarbonization and Energy Transition Community, as well as the Oslo Society of Exploration Geophysicists. As you well know, we are always looking for new people and new people joining us, organizing this type of events, but also helping out with all the activity of the local chapters. You can find us on our LinkedIn pages, as well as you can contact us at different email address. Our one is EAGE Local Chapter Netherlands @gmail.com. Now, before leaving the mic to Hannes, I want to mention that at the end of this talk, there will be a survey. So before closing your WebEx, if you can fill in the survey, it's very important for us. It's a feedback that we can use to make this type of events better. So without further ado, I will pass the mic to Hannes and have a good talk.
Yes, thank you, Diego. With respect to the survey, it will be just 2 multiple choice questions, so it should take you 5 seconds. So today we will have efforts of Fraunhofer Institute for Energy Infrastructure and Geothermal Systems in decarbonization of heating by Dr. Frank Strozyk. Diego, if you can go to the next slide. Frank, he did his diploma in geology in 2006 at the Aachen University. He followed this by a PhD at MARUM, the Center for Marine Environmental Sciences in Bremen, with the thesis Submarine Landslides in Active Marine Environments. And afterwards, he did also a postdoc at the Geological Institute in the Aachen University. And this was followed from 2013 to 2018 by a senior researcher position at the Energy and Mineral Resources Institute at the Aachen University. And from 2018 to 2019, he was the Innovation and Business Relations Manager at RWTH Innovation Company. And also in 2019, he worked as a senior researcher and project manager at the International Geothermal Center in Bochum, and since 2020, January, he is the head of transfer and strategy at the Fraunhofer Institute. So yeah, let me also welcome Frank, and before I give the presentation to you, let me just say a short note to the question and answers. If you have any question already during the presentation, you can already write it down already during the presentation so you don't forget it. And after the presentation, I will just one by one unmute you and tell you that's your turn, so you can ask your question, and then we have a little bit forth and back communication, maybe also with more interaction basically. So how does it work? If your screen maybe looks like this more or less, then you see the 3 dots on the right lower corner here, and there's this Q&A box, And yeah, you can just click on it and you can maybe ask a question, for instance, to all panelists, for instance, if you like, or you can just, yeah. But I will see everything you write, so it doesn't matter. But the best would be if you just do a Q&A box for all panelists. And one new thing we want to do today is after the event, I will unmute everyone. So if you like, stay around for a couple of minutes and just have a casual conversation. That's also sometimes really helpful. So yes, and without further ado, I will pass the presentation privileges to Frank. Yes, so good luck. Enjoy.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Maybe just before I start, I have to tell you that when the Dutch guys call me to give a presentation, I always say yes, because I have a long-term history working in the Netherlands. During my time at Aachen University, I worked for 8 or 10 years in de-risking drilling through the section in the Netherlands with NAM and Shell. So I spent a lot of time in Assen, for example. This is why I feel closely related to the Netherlands, and this is somehow really my comfort zone. So indeed, when you asked me to give a talk here, I said yes. And but today I will talk about our projects, our efforts on geothermal heat production and subsurface heat storage. I think the screen is shared now, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Perfect. In principle, I choose to select 2 of our current demonstrators that we are setting up. Also the complexity and the hurdles that we are facing off here to do these things, especially in Germany and especially here in North Rhine-Westphalia. And maybe first of all, let me just give a quick overview of what Fraunhofer is, because maybe not everyone is aware of what Fraunhofer actually is. And Fraunhofer is one of the largest organizations for applied research in Europe, maybe also in the world. And we think, looking at the numbers, it's actually the world's biggest society for application-oriented research. What we are doing is, or we try to play a central role in the overall innovation process, which means development of key technologies for commercial exploitation. So we try to link basic research done at the universities, especially in Germany, and bring it to the exploitation in business and industries. And this is one of the key things that we're doing. So at the moment, Fraunhofer hosts 75 institutes and research units. We have almost 30,000 people staff, not only in Germany, but worldwide, with an annual budget around of approximately 2.8 to 3 billion euros at the moment. So, and just to explain that, because Fraunhofer is a society and 2/3 of our budget is generated through contact research with industry and by public funding. And 1/3 of this is contributed by the German federal and countries, so the government in principle, which means that we are, let's say, partially public and partially self-funded via third-party funding. The IEG itself is one of the, let's say, newest childs in the Fraunhofer world. It was founded in December 2019 and went operational in early 2020. And we are operating from 7 locations in Germany, which is Bochum, Cottbus, Aachen, Jülich, Zittau, Weisweiler, and Karlsruhe. So I will show a map later on. And we had a quite complicated transition process and founding process, because the GZB, the International Geothermal Center, and also parts of Fraunhofer IEG, so the Institute for Systems and Innovation Research, were integrated into this new institute. And this wasn't really an easy step in the end. We work in the main fields of energy system analysis, integrated energy infrastructures. We also work in georesources, geotechnologies, and the already mentioned geothermal systems. But what we also do is we have a closer look on energy sector coupling of heat, power, and mobility, and energy storage systems in principle. What we aim for is to develop technologies and strategies for the next phase in the transformation of energy systems. And this is in principle the basis why we have been founded early next year. because the government were looking for another public research institution to deal with some of the major issues and topics that we have to deal with when it comes to the transformation of the energy systems. And our competences here, in principle, are synergies from our backgrounds in technical, natural, and economic sciences. So we learned that we have to combine all these things to have a quite good and detailed view on the systems that we are looking at. And we try to do that in principle by also implementing labs, demonstrators, and test infrastructures. And this is a little bit what I'm going to talk about today. Here again, a map of where we are located and what the main topics are that are addressed in these locations. And as you can see, North Rhine-Westphalia, we have a couple of locations with Bochum, Aachen, Weißweiler, and Jülich. This is where we mainly deal with all these topics related to geoscientific research, georesources, geotechnologies, and also the geothermal topics, and also the sector coupling, which is done in Jülich at the Forschungszentrum. We have the analysis of sector-coupled infrastructures in Karlsruhe, where also the Fraunhofer IEG is located. And then in Eastern Germany, in Cottbus and Zittau, we are doing the energy infrastructures and energy and process engineering part. So you can imagine we are now fully operational since approximately 1 year, but we also have to build up our institute in 7 different locations, which is quite challenging at the moment. This is just an overview of the departments that we have and the implemented competence centers. I'm not going to go through this in detail, just for you to have an overview. This is not the final configuration of competence centers that we will have. It's just those that are currently active. And you can see with the focus on the topics I'm going to talk about today, you can see the georesources are mainly covered at the moment by exploration and reservoir simulation group and the geothermal geology group. And from the geotechnical part, it's innovative drilling and drilling techniques, deep drilling and completion, and reservoir engineering. For the subsurface part, it's post-mining exploration, which is a quite rising stream in IEG, deep geothermal energy and borehole system, as well as near-surface geothermal systems. So maybe we just jump into the topic and just try to bring up some introduction slides. Some of them are still in German, sorry for that. So I just transferred them from another presentation I gave a couple of weeks ago. The thing that we're always looking at is a comparison of the current state and the target state that we are aiming at when it comes to the principal concept of energy transformation and transformation of the energy systems. And what we learned is that a lot of energy is indeed heat that we need. It's not only a mobility and electricity. Heat is it's one of the key topics that we have to deal with. And if we look on the target state, that's how it is like sketched for the future, for the upcoming 20 to 30 years, we can see that that indeed a lot of the energy that we will consume also in the future, and this is still rising, has to be compensated by renewable energy sources. So a lot of power will be generated by renewable energy resources, and indeed concepts of power to heat and heat to power and heat to fuel, and all these things have to be combined and to looked at. So this is really challenging for us, and the things that we are looking at is just part of it, but a quite important part of it. So if we look on the principal heat demand and what is happening actually or currently in Germany, is that in parts of Germany, there's indeed, because they are densely populated, and we have, if you look here on this picture on the left, and we have a high power and heat demand in industries that settled there. These regions are closely related to indeed those that are that show a long-term history of coal mining and coal-fired power plants. So, and since the government decided that we need a phase out of coal firing, at least in Germany, indeed we need to look for the alternatives. So as you can see, most of the coal-fired power plants will phase out till 2038. This is the principal plan, and we need some really good strategies to compensate it somehow. So North Rhine-Westphalia, as you can see in this left image, is one of the regions with the highest heat demand indeed, because of these industries that settled there, and this is then again because of the coal mining industry there. So there's in principle a circle where we have to look at, because we have to compensate a lot of energy in these regions, and heat produced in these coal-fired power plants is also something that we have to compensate somehow. So looking from the perspective of a geologist dealing with geothermal energy, or trying to pursue the rollout of geothermal energy, the chances or the opportunities you have to use these georesources are strictly varying across these regions that we are looking at. And in principle, what we are looking at today is, on one hand, the utilization of hydrothermal heat production from the subsurface, and on the other hand, subsurface heat storage in different opportunities. So in overall, we have to compensate some of the phase out of the coal mining with these geothermal energy sources or resources, but it is totally clear to us that the amount of energy and power and heat that we can get out of the subsurface in the upcoming years will not compensate all of the coal production. So we will have today a look on two of our demonstrators. One is located in Weisweiler, close to one of the still running RWE power plants that are coal-fired. And the second demonstrator is an underground heat storage demonstrator at our Bochum laboratories for the storage of solar thermal energy in mine waters, which is a quite interesting project. First of all, talking about Weisweiler. So as I said, it's the demonstrator will be located at RWE's lignite powered plant in Weisweiler. So we are talking about the lignite mining in this case. And we are a little bit in a hurry here. So there's a lot of pressure, because this is one of the oldest power plants in Germany from RWE, and this will phase out in 2028. So just a couple of years to build things up here. Our aim is to build up a research power plant here for deep geothermal energy, producing mostly heat as a pilot for this Rhineland area of North Rhine-Westphalia. And this will also include an observatory. So it will be with the full focus on research here. What we want to do is to also put the heat that is produced here finally or eventually into the Aachen district heating grid. I will come to that back later. It will be sourced in principle by hydrothermal waters from deep-seated carbonates. Also, this will be showed in more detail. And we also see this as one of the key pilot projects that might experience somehow in rollout for Northwest Europe, because the target formations that we want to have a look at here and that we want to utilize can be found in large parts of Northwest Europe. And this might be an interesting study in principle for other demonstrators or projects in this area. First of all, I want to go a step back, and because we have to look first on the data situation when it comes to the exploration for deep geothermal energy in these areas that we're looking at. And this is a map by the BGR, or a couple of maps by BGR that show the principal data situation in Germany. And this might also apply for a lot of other countries. Actually, I prefer to work in the Netherlands because of the data situation and the availability of data. But in Germany, it looks quite different, because when you look on the maps on the left and in the center, you can see when it comes to seismic data, available seismic data and deeper drillings, deeper wells, that these things are mostly focused on northern Germany and on southern Germany because of previous oil and gas exploration activities from the companies, and that there is really a really big white spot in central Germany. And also North Rhine-Westphalia has this big white spot, also when it comes to the principal evaluation of subsurface heat capacities in Germany, because especially of the coal mining industry. So in regions where they found these hard coal and lignite layers, they just dig down to these layers and then stop exploring or exploration of the subsurface, of the deeper subsurface. So there, it wasn't never really necessary to look deeper in these areas. So most of the wells in the exploration work stops somewhere between 100 and 400, maximum of 600 meters. So this finally leaves a big data gap in Germany for us now going into the exploration on deeper geo-resources. Yeah. So what we are looking at when it comes to potential target horizons for deep geothermal energy production are especially carbonates. These things are really interesting because in the Munich area and the already running geothermal plants there have shown that carbonates can be really excellent sources for hydrothermal energy production. So the targets of our projects at the moment are the Devonian carbonates and the Carboniferous carbonates that are available across large areas, at least in North Rhine-Westphalia, and as you might all know, also in large parts of Northwest Europe in principle. As you can see in the Aachen region, where our demonstrator will be located, this is like on the edge of these carbonates, and they are close to surface, which means that here we have a good opportunity to look at these carbonates in outcrop situations. So we can put our hands on and have a look, for example, on the fracture network and karstification, things like that, but also a good chance to get these things in a couple of kilometers depth. On the other hand, this location in Weisweiler close to Aachen was chosen because we have a really well-defined setup when it comes to the energy production and set up a real-life demonstrator for the production of heat and putting this into a district grid here. So what you can see here is again the power plant in Weisweiler, where our research plant will be located, and we have a really well-known heating grid, district heating grid, and the waste heat of this power plant is currently fed into this district heating grid, and 85 megawatts of this heat are produced or sent to the Aachen region, and parts of our power plant hopefully will compensate at least parts of this heat demand here. This is a closer look on the actual location. So what you can see is the open mine pit in the north and the power plant here further towards the south, which means that we are closely, that we can attach and locate our research power plant here to a well-established infrastructure when it comes to the heating grid, when it comes to all the things that are in principle required for the setup here. Another argument to do this in the Aachen region is because Aachen has a quite interesting but also very complicated subsurface geology, and Aachen is also famous for its hydrothermal springs. So what we have here is a situation of, in principle, large-scale thrust folding in front of an Bavarian mountain belt, the Eifel region. And what we today know is that these thrust folds cause that the carbonates that we are looking at have been like dragged very close to surface in the Aachen region, and that through the karst and the structures inside the carbonates, hydrothermal water reaches actually the surface. And the temperatures that have been measured here can be up to more than 70 degrees. And if we extrapolate this to depth and think about depth of 2 to 4 kilometers, we can imagine, or you can imagine, that we can deal with temperatures way above 100 degrees here. So this is a really good setup for us to get an idea of what can we expect in depth when we are going into the exploration phase for our deep geothermal energy power plant here. So again, these are the two carbonates that we will look at, and what you can see on the left is a first really rough sketch of the subsurface situation that we have to deal with, located around the power plant in Weisweiler. And the good thing is that the principal setup here shows a syncline structure, also with associated with thrust folds that dragged these carbonates very close to surface, which means we have a structural situation quite similar to that we know from the Aachen region. This also means for us that there's a really good chance that there is a circulation of hydrothermal waters in these carbonates, but also that the carbonates can be expected in depth where the waters will be really high in temperature. So as you can imagine or see here from this 3D image, the deepest part of the Devonian carbonates is expected in more than 4 kilometers depth. So this is the principal strategy that we are following. In the end of this year, we will drill a first exploration well in one of our EU-funded projects, an Interact project, which is also a quite international project in this case. And we will first drill an exploration well of around 1,500 meters to the first or the upper ones of these target horizons, the Carboniferous carbonates. And this is mainly done to get a really good data input for our subsurface modeling, because as I showed before, subsurface data, or at least of the deeper subsurface, is really scarce in this area. In the following phase, next year, I think it will rather be 2023, there will be a 3D seismic survey across this license area here, east of Aachen, to get a better image of the subsurface and a better idea of the exact location of our targets here. And then after that, it is planned to drill a deeper exploration and then maybe also production well into this area. So we think that till 24, 25, we are in a good position, or we have kicked off the first initial part, or the important part, to set up the power plant then. One thing that we always have to consider, and this is quite important in this area, is a de-risking of seismic hazards. So actually the Aachen and Weisweiler region are located in the seismic hazard risk zone, and we had a couple of shakings in the past weeks and months that again showed us that this is indeed an issue we have to deal with here. And what you can see here is a map of the principal structure in the subsurface and the location of earthquakes in the past, I think 30 or 40 years. What we can see is that we have these northwest, east, southeast trending faults, and these are quite young tertiary faults, and these are quite sensitive to induce seismicity and produce shakings a couple of times per year in principle. So what we need here is a really good seismic monitoring network, and what we also will implement in our first exploration well is a borehole observatory, because this is also from the mining authorities really a big demand here when it comes to geothermal production in these areas here, indeed. I think I'm really good in time, so we can also spend a couple of minutes looking on the second demonstrator here. This is the demonstrator in our Subsurface Laboratories in Bochum. It is located in principle at the IEG campus, and it's in principle for large-scale exploitation of hydrothermal potentials in the Ruhr area, so further north, northeast from Aachen. It principle aims on a decentralized storage and implementation of heat to the district heating grid in the Bochum area. But we are really thinking about a stepwise upscaling of the things we are doing in the next 5 to 10 years in principle. What we want to do is here to integrate shallow to deep geothermal wells with heat and cold subsurface and surface storage, also concentrated solar power systems and high temperature heat pump systems. So what we see here is that there is a lot of different components that have to be implemented into this demonstrator, and it's quite challenging to get these things running and working together quite well. Why we are doing this, or what is in principle the aim here? Again, this is an image showing that most of the energy that is required is heat in principle. But the challenging thing, and the thing that we have to think about, is having a sufficient system of storing heat, especially during summer and for the winter times. So on the right, you can see an image where we see the storage potential of heat, either coming from a geothermal heat supply or from solar thermal constructions, and the principal heat demand through the winter time. So this is something that we have to consider. So there's a high variability of the storage potential and the demand through the year. So the principal idea is to come up with a demonstrator where we can store heat for the winter and do this through summer in the subsurface. And we are lucky a little bit because there's a couple of abundant coal mining shafts in the subsurface of Bochum and also right below our feet at the IEG campus in Bochum. And the principal idea is to use these abundant mine shafts and the water in it especially for heat storage in this case. And what you can see is on the left is the principal architecture of these shafts. So these are really narrow shafts. We are not really aware of the condition of these shafts in every case. Some of them might have collapsed. Some of them are in really good condition. But in principle, what we expect is that these things are still connected somehow. So the total area that is covered by these potential storage units is really big. The demonstrator in principle looks like this as a rough sketch. So the idea is that during summer, we will use these solar collectors, these concentrated solar power collectors to heat up the water in the deeper parts of these mines and store it there for the winter time. And during winter time, we can just pump them out of the mines and use a high temperature heat pump to bring it up to the temperature of the district heating grid so that we can implement it. There are some limitations to this concept because we are totally aware that we cannot store an really high temperature water in these mines. So we are limited here to a maximum of 60 degrees at the moment. But in principle, this is where the heat pump system took place. So we need a really good heat pump system with a lot of energy and power to heat it up to more than 110 degrees that are required for the district heating grid. What you can also see here that also the different components of this demonstrator are funded through some very different projects. And this is also a good learning opportunity for us to sit together from really different working groups and project groups to communicate and integrate all these things into one demonstrator. What we are looking at is in principle the characteristics of the heating grid and the characteristics of the storage that we are looking at. And the supply temperature that is required by the district heating grid varies with the external air temperature. You can see this in the diagram below. So especially on the really cold winter days, and these things are not that often anymore in principle. But when it comes to -10 and colder, the district heating grid requires a temperature of approximately 120 degrees, while on the average winter days, it's between 80 and 100 degrees. The total capacity, finally, would be 115 megawatts. So this is really challenging when it comes to the capacities of the mine and the temperatures that can be stored here. Looking at the mine or the storage unit itself, it is in an unheated condition at around 10 degrees, maybe a little bit above, especially when it comes to the shallower shafts. So we will use this to heat it up during summer on 60 degrees. The estimated water volume for the first phase of the demonstrator is around 20,000 cubic meters at 70 meters below the surface. And as said before, the seasonal heating indeed comes from the concentrated solar power plant. I think I will skip the construction plan here of this in detail. What we're also doing is that we are planning an extension of this demonstrator here. So there are other things that we can implement, especially also later on. So on the one hand, on the production side, we're also planning to integrate deeper geothermal wells, at least one in the next years. And we are still not really aware of the subsurface situation when it comes to the hydrothermal circulation of waters in the subsurface. So some exploration work and seismic survey and a deeper drill borehole is required. But implementing this will also totally increase the capacity and the temperature to deal with. But also what we want to do on the other side is when it comes to the consumer side, that we want to test a cascaded system, which means that from the backflow of the district heating grid, which might still be up to 70 degrees, or especially when it comes to the shallower mine shafts, also temperatures of up to 30 degrees can also be used, for example, for greenhouse farming or aqua farming. So this is where we want to implement more and more components into these demonstrators, and to get a good and really good idea of how these things might work in the future, especially also in other locations. So a transformation of this abundant mine shaft is a central part of get this demonstrator running. And then we will also have a look on the many other places in North Westphalia, Germany, and beyond, to get a better idea if this is something feasible for other locations too. Yeah. So I think I was much faster than I expected in the first place. That was it from my side so far. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you. This was really informative, very interesting, and entertaining.
So I was a little bit rushing because I was afraid I'm running out of time, but I hope that was okay for you. Yeah.
It's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. So maybe I will ask also Hannes and Karin to join to open the video, and in particular I will ask Karin if she can start the opening the discussion, maybe with a question from the special interest community on decarbonization and energy transition.
Yes, please.
Special interest from me personally, if I may. So Karin, the board briefly, sorry that I was a bit late. I'm the chair of the special interest community of the EAGE on decarbonization and the energy transition. So it's a perfect topic for us. So really very interesting things. I was particularly intrigued by the presentation about the pilot of an deep geothermal system. And I would be curious where you see the main geoscience or subsurface challenges, and what still has to be de-risked until we can deploy it at large scale, or do you think we are ready for that?
So when we talk to potential investors and people that are in principle interested in these topics, what we always have to say is that geothermal energy production is a really promising georesource that is not really used well in any case. So there are some locations and hotspots where we see a clear rollout of these things, but in principle, geothermal energy is something you can use everywhere. It's only a question of your heat demand or your power demand and what you're expecting. So at the moment, the thing that we are challenging is in principle the investment risk, and not really the feasibility risk for geothermal energy. But in principle, as I showed in my talk, it really depends on where are you, what is the region and what is the subsurface situation. So when we're talking to the guys in, for example, northern Germany, the data situation is really good. We have a lot of wells and a lot of data, and we have seismic data, and we can get the idea of the feasibility of geothermal production really good. But in other locations, you don't have this data. And when you talk to the investors or the companies or the cities that are interested, and you have to tell them, but we need a 3D seismic survey and 8 deep boreholes, and you know how much these things cost, then it's getting hard to get hands on these projects and things. Yeah. But in principle, I see that there's a really good chance for a massive rollout of geothermal energy production, because when people tend then to compare to solar energy, wind energy, and all these things, they see, okay, geothermal energy is something, when it works, you have in 24 hours, 7 days per week energy production. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, for me, it's still a bit connected. There's this Basel case, induced seismicity, a bit of kind of uncertainty, how this may work out. Is this something you're confronted with, this type of discussions?
Indeed. Indeed. When we talk about new geothermal projects in our plans and, let's say, visions here, then people will always throw these worst case examples on the table. Indeed. In many of these cases, we have to say that either the problems that have been faced with were either man-made because the planning and the concept weren't that solid, or that these things would happen anyway. So it sounds a bit strange, but this is something that we might also expect for Weisweiler when it comes to the final production. So when we finally impact the water in the subsurface, there might be indeed earthquakes, because you cannot really prevent this from happening. But maybe it's on the other hand something not that bad at the moment. So when you have some really focused and shakings that you can handle and deal with, this is even better than getting surprised by a big shaking after 10 years or things like that. So the strategy is not, if you know what I mean. So the strategy is not fully clear in every case, but yeah.
I was particularly also curious because, as you say, it's something that is in people's mind and is not necessarily really a kind of an inherent risk to deep geothermal. It's not something that you cannot engineer necessarily. So it was kind of more seeing indeed how
this is a risk you have to deal with. You have to communicate this, and you have to make people aware, especially in regions like this we are dealing with, that this might happen. But this is, So, and when people say we don't want it because there could be an earthquake, and this is like a showstopper in the beginning, this is the worst thing that can happen.
Yeah, it's a problem that many new energies are facing, I guess, as well as the high capex investment that you have that is blocking setting up the systems. That's certainly another big blocker that I can understand.
To set up and to maintain, I guess. Because there are I don't know any more details about the cost of maintaining these systems. If you can.
So maintenance in principle is not the issue, but the investment cost is in principle seen as really high at the moment for us, because we need a lot of exploration work in the beginning. We need a lot of new data, and then drilling, especially the production wells for geothermal energy production, is totally different from the boreholes, you know, from the oil and gas industry, because the borehole diameters are much larger. So when you have to produce, I don't know, more than 100 liters of hot water per second, you will need a diameter of 0.5 meter or so. And coming from a depth of 2, 3, 4, 5 kilometers, whatever, you can imagine the costs of such a well. So we are not talking about 2, 3, 4, 5 million euros. It's rather 10 to 20 million euros for such a production well. Just as a rough number here. So, yeah.
Nice, interesting. I also have a question. How do I have to envision this in practice? Let's say you say you want to store the heat from the summer for the winter. Do you then just insulate a huge cavern or cavity in the subsurface or something, or just you? I mean, how does it work? Do you work with insulation or something, or?
No, not really. So the tests and simulation that we already did showed that indeed the spread of the heat during the storage time or during summer is relatively low. So, but this is totally depending on the subsurface geology and the rocks, you can imagine. So when you have a good situation, and then the isolation of the rocks themselves is good enough for an efficient storage of the heat. But in principle, we always have to put a little bit more heat into the system than we will get out later, indeed. Yeah. But the simulations that we did in the beginning really showed that, and I wasn't expecting that either, that the heated up part of the water in the mine shafts will stay relatively located in one place. So, yeah. But the idea is, if we then scale up these storage units, that finally at maybe at a certain point in time, then everything will be somehow heated up. So that the mine waters in principle will never be again below, I don't know, 40 degrees or something like this, so that you have a constant source of heat there in the subsurface.
Nice.
Oh, Hannes, please.
Yes. we have, I mean, I will just jump a bit into the questions from the audience. Or
Yes,
you can always
please.
have, of course, more questions. I mean, I just will read it. Phil just is congratulating to this presentation from the UK.
Thanks.
For some reason, I cannot zoom here, sorry. And Kees Horman has a question. I think I will just unmute you, so then you can ask the question yourself, but let me just get rid of the Q&A. Participants. Here, unmute. So Kees, you are unmuted now.
Okay, I hope everybody can hear me.
Yes, hi, Kees.
Thank you for your presentation. My question was, I'll read it out. In the Netherlands, the current geothermal and district heating installations don't meet the emission requirement of less than 18.9 kilogram CO2 per gigajoule due to additional heating requirements at very low temperatures and due to the burning of dissolved methane. How is it in your case?
Good question. I cannot answer that with 1 or 2 sentences, but yeah, let's say it this way. We are totally aware that the Netherlands, with their strategy and concepts, there are a couple of steps further than we are on the German side. So let's say that how things are still handled here are really old school and outdated here. So no big changes in the past 50 years. So a lot of coal has to be burned to produce this heat, and gas has to be burned to produce this heat. And the challenge is really big, and the pressure is really high at the moment.
I know, it's 2028 in 7 years' time.
Yes, yeah. In principle, indeed, we cannot compensate now with renewable energy. So companies like RWE, they totally need their backup solutions, and they need a basic solution that can be set up quick and fast and easily. And this might mean they would set up gas plants at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you.
But I'm really afraid that our government will tell us in maybe 10 years that in 20 years we have to get rid of all the gas in the country. So this might be the next step in the energy system transformation. So and then we have to look again, indeed. But you know about the topics of the hydrogen strategy for Europe and for Germany, and these things totally need some more research, and we have to test a lot of things. And maybe if this hydrogen topic is something that we can follow strictly, then things might be much faster in the transition than we think about at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
I might add that in the last presentation, we exactly had this conversation that the Netherlands wants to phase out gas already, right? So,
yeah.
That's probably coming.
Yes.
I was also thinking, because you pointed out that you are a little bit under time pressure.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to say something that you're looking for also people maybe or who help you with this
Yeah,
change.
good point. Hey, wasn't expecting that. So just to mention that, so in principle, with the foundation of a new Fraunhofer institution here in Germany, and we are strongly growing at the moment. And from early last year to early this year, we were growing by 100% from around 50 to 60 to 120 people. And we are always looking for more people in the upcoming years. So feel free to not send me your application forms personally, but please have a look on the IEG side. So what we learned is that especially people with a background from the oil and gas industry are really interesting for us. So we hired a lot of people when it comes to all the drilling things and also, especially also the exploration part for our projects, that with a background and experience in studying or studying oil and gas related topics or from the oil and gas industry. So this is, I think, really something where we can learn a lot from. And yeah. So feel free to have a look on our webpage and please check for job offerings there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I don't see more questions from the audience so far. Maybe Karen or Diego, do you have another question?
Yeah, I wanted actually to connect to a comment that Frank made just before hydrogen. I mean, it's a big hype topic, and it's also being considered for producing heat, for example, for industrial applications. So I was curious to hear from you where you see hydrogen as compared to deep thermal. And then you pointed out, we have the problem of intermittency with hydrogen. There's certainly also the option to put that underground and store it. So I was, just interested in your view on that and how this will potentially play out in the end.
So I'm actually not really the expert for the hydrogen strategy and all the topics related to that. But in principle, what I know is that in Germany, we are following their a really strict strategy, and that a lot of money is put into the research, and also the companies are really interested because hydrogen might be one of the big solutions for all the problems that we are facing. So like it's handled like this. I do not really see that. So I'm not really afraid that an exploitation and rollout of geothermal energy is strictly challenging a rollout of the hydrogen topic. And so an interaction is something that I think might be the good thing to do. So,
I was not thinking of a competition. I think we need to embrace all the options that we have, and just kind of thinking a bit, where would you rather go for deep geothermal? I mean, that's certainly also limited by the resource, but kind of, how do you see them evolving next to each other?
So in principle, so what we have to keep in mind is that geothermal energy might experience or might be a topic for some of the regions that we are looking at. In others, maybe not really that feasible. But hydrogen is something discussed for everywhere like this. So, but indeed, this will also be a matter of how to bring it there and subsurface or at least large-scale surface storage options and things like that. So we are also facing projects where we have to look at the subsurface capacities and the feasibility for storage of hydrogen. Indeed, this is also a topic that we're dealing with at the moment.
Okay. But you don't have an idea of cost comparison. It's early days, I understand that. But for industrial heat generation, for example, how this would play out with hydrogen and with an enhanced geothermal system?
So comparing both topics from the political side of view, then indeed hydrogen, the hydrogen topic is much more prominent at the moment. So it's a little bit challenging to keep the geothermal topics in a prominent spotlight there for the politicians at the moment, and also the funding opportunities.
But it's
Okay. Do we have other questions from the audience? I don't see any other question marks.
No, I also don't see. If there are no more questions, I would suggest that we just open all mics, have a casual discussion, and what do you think, Diego?
Yes, why not?
All right, so then everyone who wants to stay, please stay. I will unmute all you guys. Just speak whatever you want to speak. Let me just see. All attendees. Okay.
Maybe before doing that, I will just announce the next event and acknowledge some people for this event, and then who wants to leave can leave, and the other can stay, and we can have this open discussion again. So I need to share the last 2 slides.
Oh, sorry, Diego. I have to make you. Sorry, 1 second. Make you presenter. There you go.
Yes. So as usual, I would like to acknowledge the speaker, Frank, for this talk. Once more, thanks a lot from the local chapter Netherlands. As usual, we are using WebEx event platform sponsored by Aramco, and I want also to thank the special interest community in decarbonization and energy transition, the local chapters of Aberdeen, London, Netherlands, Oslo, Paris, the OSEG, and all the student chapters, DOGS and Haken. And the last slide is about our next event. Will be this 27th of May at 5 p.m. And Professor Dejan Draganov will talk about mineral exploration with active and passive source seismic interferometry, more data for lower cost environmental impact. So I hope many other people will join this event. With this, I can stop sharing and thank you all. And who wants to stay again? We are here for the open discussion.
Yes.
Okay, you're all unmuted. Please feel free.
Yes, I was really fascinated by this idea of using the mining shaft to contain the heat. And I didn't think that you didn't have to apply anything inside. So you can just use the rock as it is without any intervention.
Yeah, so far this is working and looking good, but only for the small part of the mine shafts that we are looking at the moment. We have to see how it looks in other places, and when we do the upscaling. In principle, the idea is not really that new. So there was a first pilot for using the water from abundant mines, coal mines, for heat production actually in the Netherlands. In the Haarlem region with the Mine Waters project, but these guys, I think they use the natural heat that is in the water, and the water is around, I don't know, 12, 16 degrees, something like that, and then just use a heat pump system to produce the heat. And this is quite similar to projects we're also doing where we use waters in lakes and rivers just for heat production. So if you get out a couple of degrees, so delta T from these waters, you can also use them to implement it into a heating grid. But the new aspect here is really heating up the water. And actually, after the first test phase this summer, we really have to have a look on the if there are some drastic changes in the chemistry of the mine water. So this is not really a good fresh water. You can imagine that in abundant coal mine shafts, the water is not the best one, and we really have to have a look on changes in the chemistry when we heat this up. And this is also a next step where we have to talk about with the authorities, because this might be really again a showstopper when bad things are happening there. But we are not expecting these things. But we have to check it in each case where we do this, test these things. Yeah. But if this works out and we are successful with this demonstrator, there's a good chance for a massive rollout of this concept. And we are already talking to potential investors, especially in areas where you have these abundant mine shafts in our region here in Northern Westphalia. There's a lot of these things in the subsurface. Also in the Dutch part, also the Dutch guys did coal mining in the subsurface, especially when they are planning new building up new districts for housings, and they are aware of, hey, there's a good chance for storage of some heat for the winter and things like that. This might be quite interesting for them.
I see that there was still a question in the chat box, actually, David. I think he's still online. I don't know whether you would like to speak up yourself, but it was about the skills. What set of, David, please?
Yes.
Yeah. So just wondering, what do you suggest for students to which set of skills are the most needed or the most important if you want to work in the future in the geothermal energy sector, or data analysis, or which? It's a very general question, but
yeah. So in principle, what we see is that most of the students that join us after their studies have a background in the classic oil and gas related studies topics. So and what we actually need is very similar things. We need guys with an experience in principle basic exploration techniques, seismic interpretation, well log interpretation, how to drill a well. We need engineers indeed for that, but we also need the guys with an experience in doing the simulations of the reservoir quality, the changes in the reservoir during time. So this is all things that people from the oil and gas industry are facing every day. That's classic work from there, but we can, in principle, totally adopt it from there. if this answers your question. So if you're asking at the moment when you're, let's say you're facing your master thesis or something like this, I can say I can only talk for the German side. I don't know how it is in other countries, so I'm not really sure if it makes sense if you want to work in the Netherlands to go into the basic exploration part. So the development part there might be more important. But on the German side, when it comes to our key regions where we are working at the moment, it's really basic exploration work. Yeah.
Okay.
So, for example, what we did is in Hagen, a city in North Rhine-Westphalia, we worked together with a paper company, and they also want to use a deep geothermal well for the production of hot steam for drying of their paper. And what we had to do there is also to do a seismic survey. It was just 2D lines, which seems like nothing compared to other places in this world when it comes to seismic surveys, but it was actually the first seismic survey in North Rhine-Westphalia in the past 40 years. So it's especially for the mining authorities, we have to go through every step like it's brand new with these authorities, and we are challenging things that in other places were quite normal 50 years ago. You know? So when it comes to studying things that are really helpful, fruitful for a career in geothermal exploration, production things, then it totally depends on where you want to go.
Okay.
Is it rather in the middle of Germany, or is it Iceland? As a best case. Yeah.
May I make one more comment, please? This is Kees Hornman.
Yeah.
You worked in Assen, you mentioned, so
Yeah.
you will be acutely aware of the national trauma in the Netherlands of the induced seismicity in the Groningen
Indeed.
field,
Yeah.
and it had severe consequences. There was one farmer who had a geothermal installation in the southern part of Limburg, so quite close to your area,
Yeah.
and that caused some induced seismicity, and the state Dutch mining authority immediately stopped that.
Yeah.
Now, that in contrast to your comments where you portrayed induced seismicity some sort of a strain relief. He said it's good. You don't have to wait for a big earthquake. So the attitude to Germany is clearly very much different from it is in the Netherlands.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have to say that's not the German attitude, that's my attitude.
Oh, I see.
So the German attitude would be, we won't do it if there is even a minor chance for an earthquake. So actually, at the moment, our public relations and communications team are the most important team when it comes to our geothermal projects. So, and even in the areas like the Aachen region, where people are totally aware that there is a high frequency in natural shakings, also these guys are, let's say, not that optimistic about having here deeper wells that might produce or induce earthquakes. Yeah. So this is when it comes to the communication part and to the public part and talking to the people, this is the biggest issue. But on the other hand, to be honest, a lot of people in this area are strictly and close related to the existence of energy producing companies here. So I don't know, in the area of Weisweiler, I would suggest or think of 60 to 80% of the people living there are working by directly or indirectly working for RWE and the power plants. So when we tell them, we will try to compensate some of the energy production and on the long term also compensate some of the jobs that will be lost with the phase out of the coal mining. This is an argument on the other side, you know. So
I see they have a vested interest. Yes.
Yeah.
I see that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But thanks for mentioning that. So I'm actually, when working in Assen with NAM and Shell, this was really the hot topic rising up, and this was also like a phase out of my part and participation in subsurface exploration and de-risking of drilling through these section and things like that. So all the colleagues at NAM from one day to the other were only dealing with de-risking and communication of these things.
Right.
I think
Sorry. We got another
Yes,
question, but I think you cannot see it. Jaap, Jaapmond, if you want to ask it yourself, otherwise I can read it.
No, that's all right. What I would like to ask is, you talk about seismic, you want to use seismic. Now, it's what you call deep, it's maybe mainly shallow. And I was wondering, if you talk about seismic, whether you then want to acquire seismic with long offsets so that you can apply full waveform inversion.
Could you say that again, please?
Oh, well, my question is, if you want to get good resolution shallow,
Yeah,
and there is this method of full waveform inversion.
yeah, right.
And so I wonder if you think of seismic in that particular case, you want to have sort of turning waves, so you would need to shoot seismic with very long offsets.
Yeah.
Are you thinking in that sort of terms?
Yeah. So actually, when it comes to the seismic survey, this is also really an issue and challenging us, because for a really good estimate on the reservoir quality and the thickness and the distribution, all these things, you indeed need a really good resolution there and depth. And so I think the techniques of the seismic surveys themselves, they will change strictly from one place to the other. And I have the feeling, especially in areas where we see that the target horizons are outcropping in one place and are in kilometers depth in another place, I'm not really sure if this will be shoot with one technique in one go. I have the feeling. So at a certain point, when it comes to really deep targets, I don't see that there is a good chance for getting really hands on the reservoir horizons, or in this case the carbonates, in the quality that would be required for a development. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So in principle, finally, drilling will be the key technique to get the idea of the reservoir itself. So, yeah.
Okay, Diego, you said there's a question from Evert.
Yeah, I saw Evert raising his hand, but I don't know if he wanted to ask something.
Yes, I wanted to ask something that is related to the mine shafts.
Yeah.
I know that for decades we have been pumping both on the German and on the Dutch side to keep the groundwater levels low. It is basically to prevent these risks of large-scale seismicity, basically really earthquakes.
Yeah.
So how is that going to influence your own thought, what you said about that making this lubrication is good because it releases stresses? There are many, unknown locations, and we know that some of those unknown empty mine shafts, now they are occupied by villages or by extensions of towns.
Yeah.
So I also heard you say that you do not expect these things to really occur, but how can you be so sure about that?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think it's just part of a de-risking strategy, and in principle, there is indeed a conflict of interest. Let's say it this way. In this point, indeed, a rollout of this technique or this concept of heat storage in the subsurface or geothermal production in any case, it's quite delicate, and we have to look on each project and each region in really great detail before we will be even allowed to do something there. So it's not like we do what we want. No chance.
No, sure. It can be very helpful, in fact, to do it, to start exploring it, because it is a very expensive operation to pump the waters and to keep the water level down. It's one of our major costs, in fact.
Right. And just to say that again, so that you don't understand me wrong, I'm not really saying that we will provoke subsurface induced seismicity in any way, because this might reduce long-term buildup of stress and things like that. It's just that my opinion and what I've seen from the setups is that, so there's a coincidence that especially in those areas where we have an increased risk in seismicity, induced seismicity, these are in many cases also the quite promising areas when it comes to geothermal production, because of the structure in the subsurface, hydrothermal water circulation and faults and all these things, and fracture networks.
Yeah.
But I have the feeling if we start with our general conversation with the fact that if you will trigger an earthquake, this is a showstopper and you will not do anything. So this is always what I'm always saying, talking to the ministry. Guys, it cannot be that when we will trigger one small earthquake in the Weisweiler region, that this is a showstopper for deep geothermal production in North Rhine-Westphalia, for example.
Yeah.
So this is like, this is sorry. This doesn't work for me and for us. So, and it was shown that geothermal production is really risky and things like this might happen. And, but on the other hand, there are some good arguments for indeed dealing with this issue, and that you need monitoring, we need a seismology monitoring network. We have a good control of what is happening in the subsurface. Indeed, when it happens, but this can also be a plus, let's say it this way, because once the stress is released, you know, and nothing really bad happens, this would actually be a scenario to deal with.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm not a guy standing in front of an audience of researchers, of politicians, and people like that, and I'm not going to tell them there won't be any earthquakes.
No, but I can really imagine that if you can somehow organize these slight reduces of stress levels.
Yeah.
And then it may take 100 years before you have released all the stresses, but still, if you are able to do it in a controlled way, I think this is also a strong story to the general public, because you can also basically ensure them that even though they will feel maybe sometimes, most of the times they will not feel, but it will always be controlled and limited such that their houses will not be damaged structurally.
Right. Yeah.
And so that then it is not anymore. I mean, it's still a risk, but it is a risk that people can basically trust that it will be within bounds that are reasonable.
Yeah. And indeed, so this is something not only a critical issue in Germany. You also know that in the Netherlands this also happened, and that there are showstoppers like the California wells. With also induced seismicity. But in principle, I say with all these existing examples of showstoppers and things where we had these issues, we also have a really good learning on that. So it's not like, okay, that's it with the topic, we will never put our hands on that again. This would be horrible, because at this point we should revise actually coal production and coal firing.
Yes, I agree completely. Yes, sure.
So, so all the damage done by coal production, coal mining, for example, this is what people get used to and accepted it. So
now nobody talks about it anymore.
Yes.
Yes, I agree. Sure.
Yeah. So we have still this issue of resettling whole villages in the mining areas, and
you
know.
Yes.
So what I just want to say is that I'm also expecting, and I think this is just fair, that the politics and the society should give us a chance and say, okay, it's not with every issue that rises up, we should really stop all these activities and do research.
Yes, I agree.
This is how things are working. So,
but it also requires, let's say, us to inform them, such that they are able to say, yes, okay, we give you a chance.
Yes. And at the moment, what we are doing is we are working on, like, let's say, like a really a big working plan with all the related issues and risks, especially for the government and the public, so that we try to be as transparent as possible to tell everybody what could happen and what are the issues and what do we know, what we don't know, things like that. You know, this just do it as transparent as possible, and then things are even much better.
Yeah. True.
Yeah.
Yep. Thanks.
But to be honest, for the German part, I'm still a little bit afraid of, maybe you know the word German angst. So in Germany, it's common sense. When there is a risk for something, then we better don't do it. So this is why I'm always a little bit jealous, especially the Dutch guys and the US guys. There's a little bit more, let's take this risk and let's do some investment, let's try this out. And this is what is sometimes really missing in Germany.
Yeah,
you know?
but I can see that. On the other hand, I think in the Netherlands we have taken a risk, and at the moment the people in Groningen, so it's not just a trauma for what is happening, but also the way that we as a society through our government are dealing with these problems. We have left them in the cold for many years, and still now it is not easy if you live there to get compensation.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
So that really makes everybody else, reluctant to accept anything like that anywhere else. So that doesn't help.
Okay, so on the German side, I have to say, once we see that there's a good chance for the rollout of something like geothermal energy, I think the government in the first place will say to us, okay, who is going to pay people when in 50 years the houses are like broken and things like that? So this is then again the German way. So
Well, but if you can foresee that risk exists, then it is good to think about it.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yes. But who is actually able of thinking about things that might happen in 50 or 60 years?
No, that
so
is
this
true.
is really,
No, that's true. But it is important that the responsibility for taking up the cost of that risk is put somewhere.
Yeah, indeed.
So that you know beforehand where it is.
Yeah.
And the license to operate is always given under conditions, but the body who does give that license to operate, it basically gives the trust that it will be done without too much damage, without unacceptable damage.
Yeah, we really have to say that, especially in our area here, especially the mining authorities, these guys are quite critical. And they are checking every detail of the things that we are doing. Because on one hand, there is not really an experience with these deeper subsurface exploration and production works because of the coal mining history. And on the other hand, indeed, everybody's looking on these projects and demonstrators.
Yeah.
So the authorities and the government are not. They don't really like the feeling of being in charge of something that might happen there. So.
Yeah, sure.
So hey, that was Fraunhofer who drilled the hole, like this. So or RWE or whoever, So this is also why we see that, especially from the companies, and there's somehow a spirit in especially the German companies. They don't really trust things enough to put a lot of investment into these new things. So they really like the idea of having such a CO2 reducing new heat and energy producing tool. But when they realize, okay, we have no idea if this works in your location because we don't know the subsurface and there are no really good demonstrator for such a setup. Then they're telling us, okay, then please come back when you have a public funding for our location or something like this. So this is something we have to deal with.
Yeah.
But so that wasn't really fair because that doesn't account for all the companies. There are some companies that are really thinking about the future and thinking about the next 20 years, and they are going into projects with us and also do a lot of investment into these things. Like the paper company I was talking about. And also RWE is quite on a good way. They realized, okay, we have to think for alternatives because coal is phasing out in the next 20 years and we need alternatives. So looking on wind energy, on solar energy, and also on geothermal energy. Well, everybody is thinking that geothermal energy will never be a big player, just in addition to other things. So
or it can be crucially important in the transition phase.
Yes, absolutely. So when you know that, for example, like here in the Aachen region, we need these 85 megawatts of district heating. And if we are lucky and everything works out with the demonstrator and we can produce, let's say, 20 megawatts of from this power plant. This is the 4th or 25% of what is required, and that's actually for the let's say the basic load. That's something. So we have to burn a lot of coal to produce 20 megawatts of heat. So yeah, thank you. Will.
Thank you all for this nice discussion. Very interesting. Diego, I will hand it over to you, maybe for some final words or something.
Yeah, well, I already thanked everybody for joining us tonight, and I think it was successful. And so yeah, we can close here the meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you all for the participation.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks for inviting
Bye.
me.
Have a good evening. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.